session, so it's available later. And I'll give folks just a few seconds to settle in as we do. And I just want to begin today by thanking the Beara Education Foundation, the Library of Congress Teaching with Primary Sources program, and DePaul University and Citizen U, which is part of Beara Education, for sponsoring the series of RISE webinars. As we're going to share with you at the end, the dialogue that we've created around racial equity and the energy that we've created as we've come to these webinars for all of us has been inspirational. I want to personally thank Dr. Tina Curry, Felicia Shaviri, and Susie Evans for the ways that they inspire us all, including me, and say at the end we're going to give you an invitation to keep this conversation going and to keep the dialogue going. With that, we want to start just with a short video and ask you to just sit back for a second and take this in. And as you do, if you could jot down what you feel.
What is it?
I'm Ariel Sky Williams. I'm 8 years old. I'm unarmed and I have nothing that will hurt you.
It's just kind of a thing we practice at our house. There are great police officers out there. There's also some police officers who are not so good.
And my fear is that you run across one of those bad ones.
For some reason, people of color have always been a target by the police.
Before they became a policeman, they were a person. And that person took all their ideas and all their thoughts and all their prejudice into their job.
Why would a police officer assume that you did something bad?
Maybe because of my skin color.
I remember being put in handcuffs for something that had nothing to do with me. I was literally walking in the mall. Cops slammed me on the ground, busted my lip, chipped my tooth. That actually made me really mad.
How about the time they pulled us over with me in the car and arrested me and left all of you guys sitting in the car and nobody knew how to drive on the side of the road because the bumper on the car was kind of hanging off?
No.
You know, we live in Puyallup. There's people that don't even have a bumper on their car.
My rear brake light wasn't working, and I got to my destination and they were working.
I was about your age, actually. They grabbed me.
Why?
I didn't know at the time. They just grabbed me. They threw me onto the police car.
I got tased that time. That time they tased me because they said I wasn't complying.
Ariel, are you okay?
What's wrong, baby? I'm okay, I'm alive, all right? Every day I get to see you, I get to do this, right? All right, come on, let's calm down, let's finish this, all right? You good? Hey, you're making me cry. Come on.
You have to be careful when you're out there in this world because this world's not going to always be honest or fair to you. I know, Sean, you got a little bit lighter than the rest of them, so it's a possibility you won't get stopped.
Sound like you just pulled him over.
Okay. If you were driving, cop pulls you over.
Police gets out the car, comes to the window, what would you do?
License and registration, please, ma'am.
Why do you think I pulled you over?
I don't know, tell me.
When a police officer says something to you, you're black. You can't be looking at them saying, oh, I don't know, why don't you tell me?
Well, I mean,
that right there is giving them the license to pull you out of your car and physically harm you because it will be done.
Don't get upset, don't get sassy. Why did you pull me over? You don't have, just follow instructions and stay calm.
Okay.
Do you think just being a police officer and pulling you over, regardless of if you feel you've done something or not, they should get your respect?
That's a tricky question.
The answer is yes.
Yes. If you got to go to your wallet to get your ID, say, can I go reach in my back pocket to get my ID out?
You could do what I do, and I show them my hands, so when they're walking up, they see I don't have anything in my hands.
I'm Ariel Sky Williams, and I have nothing that will harm you or hurt you.
And what's the next place you put your hands when you're driving or on the steering wheel? with your hands out.
If at all possible, turn your phone on.
And call someone and put it on speaker.
But whatever you're doing, I want you to say what you're doing before you do it.
You don't write any statements.
Well, you have to write a statement.
You don't have to write anything. You're a minor. I'm responsible for you. No one can tell you anything else.
If it tells you to be quiet, be quiet. Do everything that you can to get back to me. I see it weighing on you, and I don't want it to weigh on you.
I'm just worried about Donovan. I'm worried about him now.
Who are you guys talking about?
My nephew and her cousin.
I don't want him to be shot. I don't want him to go to jail.
You guys, if you could say anything to police, what would you say?
Learn about people, learn about their problems.
Take some diversity training. I mean, it should be like at this point, like a monthly requirement.
You know, there's really nothing at this point that they could do that would make me feel any safer with them without them just point blank, clearing them all out and starting all over from scratch.
So don't always assume that all of them are bad.
But all you see on the news and in newspapers, and it keeps happening. It's just in a different way. It's like how people are like, you should forgive so-and-so, but they keep doing it to me. I forgave them, but they keep doing it to me. It gets harder and harder to forgive them.
Wow.
So as we begin today, again, I want to thank Dr. Tina Curry, Felicia Shaviri, and Susie Evans for facilitating with us today. In the chat, please share what your feelings are right now and what brings you to this webinar today. As we gather together, we want to talk about empathy. And so the intentionality of sharing this video with you is to feel what those folks are feeling in that video. So if you can just, as you join us today, just put down, what are you feeling right now? What responses do you have? This is hard work that we're going to do, and I'm very blessed to be surrounded by 3 very compassionate and empathic educators. But we also want to give that same compassion and empathy to you. And when I've shown this video before to my graduate classes or to others, the range of emotions has been from anger to sorrow to hopelessness. But the reality is, and we all have different feelings. The importance is that we all come around with a commitment to open dialogue about these topics and about this issue. And I'm going to ask actually the renowned Dr. Curry to lead us off today. If you can go ahead and share the quote, Tina.
Sure. So I just want you to just listen to the sound of my voice as I read this quote out loud, because there's something powerful about spoken language, and you can follow along with me silently, but it's from Toni Morrison. No one ever talks about the moment you found that you were white, or the moment you found out you were Black. That's a profound revelation. The minute you find that out, something happens. You have to renegotiate everything. And so in the chat, think about that moment for you, that profound revelation when you realized that you were Black, or that you were white, or that you were Latino, that you were Asian. And even if you can't remember that moment, share that in the chat. And for those of you who are sharing, thank you so much for being vulnerable to share that with us.
You know, and as I read through your responses to how you're feeling, that sorrow, that sadness, I hope is our call to action. And as I hope is our call to shift what's happening in our country, but in our classrooms especially. And as you share when you found out you were white or you were Black, I'm just going to ask my colleagues, Tina or Felicia or Susie, what do you recall?
I recall when I remember the first time I saw the difference between me and someone of another race, what stands out most for me is being a freshman in high school. And I went to a high school in a predominantly white neighborhood in Chicago. And I remember there was a total of 6 doors that entered the school, but the Black students went through one door. That was the only door we were allowed to, without it being said that we were allowed to go through that door. And the rest of the students, the other students, the white students, could go through any door without question. And I thought, wow. What's interesting about it is I just went along with this was the norm. This is the way it was. So I didn't think anything was really wrong with it. It's just, that's the way it was.
Thanks so much, Felicia. And as you listen to Felicia's words and think about your own experience, think about the feelings that you had about that experience. Did that experience raise you up and make you feel proud, or did that experience make you feel different and diminished? Because that's a distinction that we need to be cognizant of in our students. So as we think about our students of color, our Black students, our brown students, students who are different in any way, we need to always think about what was that first realization like, and what was that feeling like, because that forms our identity. And today we really want to talk about this from a lens that is so significant in my own life and in my own research. We're going to talk about it through empathy. And today we're going to bring together our previous 2 sessions, and we're going to focus on how we can unite the inquiry and reflection and self-awareness with empathy. We're going to look at the power of empathy in our lives and in our teaching and in our work as racial equity allies. And we're going to look and give you 4 practical strategies to teach empathy skills, because empathy is a skill. It's something we as teachers can teach our students and teach each other. We're going to do that using powerful inquiry-based teaching methods that we can use with the Library of Congress primary sources. And then we're also going to share 5 elements of creating a developmental relationship with students, a relationship grounded in mutual respect and regard that is especially significant for Black students. And as we begin today, I want you to look at this primary source from the Library of Congress. It's a powerful source. If you look, it can examine the picture in this source, which is a 1965 photo of African-American children on their way to PS 204. And they're passing mothers protesting the busing of children to achieve integration. So looking at that picture in the chat, what do you feel when you look at that picture? And I'm going to ask Felicia what she feels looking at that picture.
What I felt looking at this picture, Donna, is I was overwhelmed initially, especially after reading the caption that these are mothers and these are children. And when you see that the women are standing with umbrellas and you have the Black children that are standing there in the rain, it was really overwhelming to me. And then as I looked at the picture even more, there was a series of emotions, because as I look at the faces of the children, you could see the young girl up front, she's looking like she's puzzled, like, I just don't understand why you're treating us differently. Then you see the curiosity with the 2 boys on the side. But then the one that stands out most for me and really gives me hope is the young boy in the suit. The young boy in the suit it's like he knows that they're there, but he's not allowing anybody to get under his skin. He has his hand in his pocket, and I think, wow, this is hope for our future. So even though I look at the women and I think I feel sadness for them, because they are the adults, they are the adults. And I think, wow, it's really a sad picture. But if I could also add to that, Donna, for our participants, if you can look at that, what came to you first in that slide? What did you notice first when it first popped up? If you can remember that right now. Thank you.
Great insights, Felicia. So as we look at empathy, I've been studying empathy since 1984, to be exact. And that's actually when I was first introduced to the lens of empathy through the work of Alfred Adler and Carl Jung as I studied to become a school counselor. And it became almost an obsession with me to deeply understand empathy. Because until that point in my life, and I was an adult already, a very, very young adult though, by the way, very young, that in 1984, I realized, oh, not everyone feels what I feel. As it was explained to me how empathy is a skill, I really assumed that whatever I felt in relation to mirroring other people's feelings, other folks felt. And I started to delve into the research. And I came upon the research of Kenneth Clark. And Kenneth Clark did this incredible study back in it started in 1939, and then 1954, he was prominent in testifying in the Brown versus Board of Education to desegregate schools. What Clark had been researching is what happens to us when we look at Black children or white children. So he did this incredible study that was a Black doll and a white doll, and he gave the dolls to children and asked them which they liked better. Gave it to Black children, gave it to white children. And I was going to ask Tina, who also is very familiar with the study, what was her reaction to this study when you first learned about it?
When I first saw the video, I just felt deep sadness. And I was trying to wrap my brain around like exactly where was this great sadness coming from. And it came from just the shame on the Black children's faces when they realized that they could be talking about themselves, that they would look at the Black doll and see the Black doll as the one that was ugly or not pretty. And that's how they saw themselves. And it got me to thinking about how race truly influences Black children's self-esteem, that low self-esteem that they have, and that even at a very, very young age that they did not even see their Black as beautiful, and that it was sad.
Yeah, I think, for me too, that study and just the video of the study, which is very disturbing on many levels, where you have both white and Black children preferring the white doll because it looks cleaner, because they all said it looked prettier. And the kids really preferencing white spoke something to me, and it spoke to my heart in many ways. And we're going to talk about what Clark concluded as he went through the studies, and he and his wife did extensive studies on racism and on the key to combating racism and finding out that empathy was what was missing when we looked at racist behaviors. And we want to tie that to how you can truly teach your students and even deepen in yourself empathy using primary sources from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress has incredible resources that capture our historical context, but more importantly, they capture the emotion of a certain moment in time, either through a photo or through written text or video. And using the primary source analysis tool, as we've done in the previous 2 webinars, you guide students in a process of inquiry that allows the heart and mind to open to learning empathy. We have to get beyond our cognition and beyond our observation and our cognitive presence with any artifact in order to open to empathy. So if you look at the photo that you have right now, which is a group of African Americans marching near the Capitol building in Washington, they're protesting a lynching. And if you can see that, I'm not sure if you can blow that up on your own screen, but it's a smaller image. The people in the image are smaller. If you could look at that photograph, and this is 1946, and you see Black folks in the picture. In the chat, if you were imagining what do you think that the people in that photograph were feeling at that time? What do you think they're feeling? If you look at what you can see, if you could just in the chat, if you had to imagine, if I were your instructor and I was saying, okay, look at this photo imagine what they're feeling. What would you feel? What would you think that they're feeling? So please go ahead and put that in the chat, and any of my colleagues can chime in if they can read the chat while I attempt to multitask. If we look at empathy and we use the primary source analysis tool first, and you see a picture of the tool on the screen, where we look and have students first, just what do they see, just describing images, and we really unpack that for students. And then using inquiry, we move students along to what do they think? What do they really think is happening? And we really unpack that for students and go deeper. And then we go to what do they wonder about? We've set the stage to take them even deeper. So after we wonder, then we can look at what do those people feel? What do they feel as they're protesting lynching back in 1946? That sets the stage for true empathy. So we're going to share with you, and I'm going to turn it over to Susie to kind of moderate as I multitask and give you a video to share.
So what really is empathy? I want you to think about this and put in the chat. I want you to share the last time you recall feeling empathy for a student. And what was it like? What was it like? If you can share that in the chat. The last time you recall feeling empathy for a student, and what was that like?
I promise, Susie, I'm getting to it.
No, you're great. And some answers are rolling in here.
Great.
I felt like an advocate. I felt determined. Great, great.
So now let's listen and see what empathy is.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So the reality of empathy is that it's different in so many ways from what we think it is. And as you shared in the chat, as you shared in the chat, those moments of empathy for you are often moments when you've connected with a student or you've connected with something that stirs something in you. You know, as I read Camille's, where she felt empathy in the chat, Camille stated she felt empathy for students as they went through remote learning. Or if you feel empathy that causes you to react and to want to be called to action, as Principal Rodriguez said. That call to action, those feelings come because you've experienced something yourself where you could connect and you could relate to it. So you could see something of you within someone else. The interesting part about empathy that Kenneth Clark and his wife discovered is that the distinction in race comes when white people could feel sentimentality or pity towards Black people, but it's from that position of superiority. And what he discovered is what we were calling, or what white folks might have been calling empathy, was really just sympathy. That's all it really was. Empathy would connect us to the experience of Black Americans on a deeper level and create that human condition, that connection of I feel what you are feeling. I don't know exactly what it's like because my skin is a different color, but I can feel your pain. It's at that point of empathy that we can then become an anti-racist ally. Without the point of empathy, we become a sympathizer. Not that that is bad, not that that's not needed. However, it's not the point of action. I think Principal Rodriguez and a couple of the others of you who've talked about being called to action when you felt something, that's genuine empathy. And so I have teach share exactly her point of empathy and what that has felt like with her in her profession as a teacher.
So I often say that thank you, Donna, everything I've learned about being a good teacher, my students taught me. And I think one of the best lessons I learned about empathy was from my students, where they helped me to see empathy like almost like grace, where something happened and I really needed my students to be emphatic towards me, and they would not. And the kid says, well, no, do you remember when this happened and this is how you responded? Oh, now you see how it feels, huh? And so what they taught me is that you can't expect empathy when you need it, when you don't give it to others. So you have to give it to others, because trust me, one day you're going to need it as well. And so that's something that my students taught me.
And Felicia, was there a moment when you felt empathy reached across racial lines, when you could feel empathy from a white person?
Oh, yes. Across racial lines, I'll say, I have to use the example of Byron Katie. When I first met Byron Katie, I had no idea who she was. I just knew that I was feeling something. My life was shifting. I was changing careers. And when I met her, there were very few words that were exchanged, and Byron Katie wrapped me in her arms and she took my hand, and this, I have to say, it threw me off kilter for a minute, and she kissed my hand. She kissed my hand twice, and she held me in her arms, and the love that was shared in that moment was just, it was amazing for me. And yeah, race, color had absolutely nothing to do with it. It was totally a human connection.
And it's that connection that I think drives us. And those of you who don't know Byron Katie, she's definitely a renowned, she's an author and a philosopher that both Felicia and I follow, but she is the author of Loving What Is and a few other books, and has created an inquiry-based system to life. And it is a white woman. But it's those kinds of experiences that transcend the norm. And that's what we want to teach our students. And as we think about teaching our students of why we need empathy, Tina, do you want to share why we have to be racial equity champions?
Yeah, so we know the research. We're all familiar with the research that children of color tend to be suspended at higher rates compared to their white counterparts. I mean, so much so that Illinois had to pass legislation, Senate Bill 100, to try to do something about that. And we know that poor students tend to go to schools that have fewer resources, and our poor students are students of color. Black students are underrepresented in gifted programs. There is a huge racial achievement gap in our country for our Black students. And so we have to try to change that narrative. I love the way Cornelius Minor puts it. He calls it crafting a better hero narrative for our children of color. And that's what we're gonna have to do. And that means being an equity champion in order for that to happen. So when you look at this quote, I have never encountered any children in any group who are not geniuses. There is no mystery on how to teach them. The first thing you do is treat them like human beings. And the second thing you do is love them. I want you to take a look at this primary source document here and look at these children. What do you see? Who do you see? Who would you say they are? Could they be young people who could discover a cure for cancer? So in the chat, I want you to put down, how are you showing up for students? How are you showing empathy for your students? How do you plan to show empathy for them as they will be returning after, I don't know, how many months they've been out of the building since March? So it's been that long for them. So just put in the chat really quickly, how are you planning to show empathy towards your students?
And thank you so much for your chat about empathy and the comment about, as a white person, having trouble saying, I feel your pain. I totally understand that and can relate to that too. What you can say is, I can imagine what this feels like. I think that I found in my own work, constant work, as an ally against racism, that we have to become as close as we can to acknowledging the feeling that we imagine exists and feeling that and allowing ourselves to feel that pain. What we want to talk about too is give you some strategies to use the Library of Congress primary sources and the wonderful tools that are within the library and the vast collection in a way that takes it to the next level. And so in order to do that, I want to share with you the research around the types of empathy and how we can help our students to learn each of the distinctions of the 3 types of empathy so that they can take the inquiry process that guides the Library of Congress primary source program and use, take it to a next level as a tool and a resource to unpack systemic racism that's inherent in our educational system and become anti-racists themselves and have that connection of empathy. So the first type of empathy is the kind that we just normally have in our human condition, and it's cognitive empathy. It's that simple thing of cognitively thinking about, I know what sadness is, and so you feel sad, so I can say, oh, you feel sad. I'm not feeling with you at this point, but I am cognitively saying, I understand. Whether or not that's how deep we take that, cognitive empathy allows us to play safe. Cognitive empathy is that kind of empathy that a lot of white people may try to express towards Black people, and it's true, it's valid, but it's also extremely safe. So when you think of the image of George Floyd, and you think of what may have happened to you, and you compare it to looking at this image, and you think of any other image that you may have when violence has been attached to a person of color. Cognitive empathy allows you to look at a photo and stay a bit apart, but it's a first essential next step. It's the first way we can help our students to get to empathy. And cognitive empathy gives us that intellectual form of understanding. If you are a teacher of social emotional learning, if you are trying to guide students in self-awareness and having that emotional language and vocabulary, cognitive empathy is important. It's how to get students there first. And Felicia's going to ask you to share something in the chat.
I'd like for you to share when you have had a conversation with someone that expressed or showed cognitive empathy towards you. I have to give you a brief example. I around that weekend of George Floyd, I found myself feeling a tremendous amount of emotions, and I reached out to Professor Kill to express to her a lot of the things that were happening within me that I was trying to get grounded on. Well, there is a colleague of both of ours, and I found myself getting really, really bothered even more, because when I reached out to speak to her, she responded with cognitive empathy. On an intellectual level, she could understand what was happening in the world, but it was outside of her ability to be able to feel. And I didn't know what to do with it. So Professor Kill, you helped me to understand that I was on the right page with that. But I didn't, what's interesting is I wasn't sure how to really approach that. So having Professor Kill, who is a white woman, to be able to see that and to help me as well, to understand that this colleague of ours just could not relate, was really comforting in a sense. Does that make sense, Professor Kill?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that first step. It's, and we want to share with you a strategy. When we're talking about empathy, we want to move folks, especially our students, along the path of having a more equity-driven experience in their lives and of uniting with Black students, with white students, with brown students. We've got to allow that process to evolve. So there's a strategy called perspective making, and this you can use in your teaching right away as you begin the new school year, especially if you're doing remote teaching. It gives students that comfortable, safe space from which to start feeling. And the way that perspective making is, it allows us to really help to use that, guide students to imagine themselves in a situation without that depth of feeling at that exact time. So if you look at the Library of Congress source that's up on your screen, in perspective making as a strategy, here's what you would do. The first step is to use the primary source analysis tool with your students in an inquiry-based lesson, as you would typically do. You would look at the source, ask them what they might see in this source, describe it, then reflect on what they think, and then start to think about wondering. And as a collective, and you could do this remotely using a chat box or using a discussion post, however the platform is you're using, so that you can guide students to start unpacking with inquiry what they might see and think. Then what you would do is to move on. So now we're going to take that from that very academic language, and we're going to move that academic language to be more around equity-driven language and social emotional learning language, to look at feelings, asking students in the second round of describe what feelings you think the people in the photograph are having. What would you feel if this were you? What would you believe about you? And what would you want? Those three key, which we talked about in our last session as well, moving to a more feeling-centered perspective allows us that ability to now put ourselves in the shoes of someone else at a cognitive level, at a safe level. So Tina, I know that you've had experience in perspective making in yourself with your own students. Can you share the story of Nathan and Rashad? Because I think that's so powerful to say what our students have walked through.
Yes, and it's so important to teach them this, because they're in community with each other for several hours a day. And so in my public speaking class about 2 years ago, I have a student who identified himself as part of the LGBTQ community. Nathan was born Nancy, born a girl, but identified as male and insisted that he be called Nathan. And Nathan was bitter and just angry that he was being forced to conform in a world that didn't recognize his identity or appreciate it. And Rashad says to Nathan one day, Nathan, well, help me understand. I grew up in a family where my father is raising me to be a husband, and he wants me to get married and give him grandchildren. I want to understand your world. Help me, help me. And so Nathan and Rashad decided to ask everyone to get up out of their seats, and they formed this circle in my classroom. And the next thing I know, they're talking to each other. They're coming to this place. They're trying to understand each other and respect each other and express empathy towards each other. And it was the most important conversation that I've ever witnessed as a teacher, and one of the most amazing things that I have witnessed students do. And it wasn't something I explicitly taught, but it's about how to be the model for students, like be what you teach for them. And it was an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah, so
Hey,
Tina, I
Tina?
do think you taught it. You definitely taught it because you gave them the safe space from which to enter, and you gave them the ability. That's teaching it. That's allowing students that safety net. Go ahead, Susie. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, responding to Tina, it made me think about something. I'm one of the people that answered in the chat that I didn't know when I knew I was white. I really can't pinpoint it. But when I was in second grade, I was a big baseball fan already, and I ordered from Scholastic Books, and I got The Baseball Life of Willie Mays. And it was that book that opened me up into the world that, oh, it wasn't so much that I am white, but that Black people have it different. And when you listen to them talk about not being the best players on the team, but they couldn't stay at the hotel, they couldn't eat at the restaurant, they were sleeping on buses, they got spit on when they were sliding into second base, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That completely opened a new world to me. And I guess in reflection, I guess I realized I was white and I was privileged as well. So it kind of opened up a lot. And I think that might have been my first ability to have a perspective that was different than my own. So had to throw that in.
Yeah, perfect story, Susie. And as we go down the empathy continuum, the second type of empathy is emotional empathy. And that's the feeling of what someone else is feeling so that you can feel what they're feeling. If during the very opening video that we saw today, if you were moved to tears, if that really unsettled you, if you could feel your heart a little faster, if you could feel that pit in your stomach that you were about to really be to cry, what you were experiencing was emotional empathy. When the team here, when we showed the video, what I noticed immediately was Tina welling up and Felicia welling up, and even Susie. It was that, and I actually stopped the video before it was done because it was too emotional. They were feeling it. That capacity to feel is part of who we are. And just in 1992, actually, I think, science discovered something called mirror neurons, which have existed long before them, but we are so new and young in the field of studying empathy that it wasn't until 1992 that we gave a label to what happens when you feel what someone else is feeling. It has happened as long as there have been humans, but imagine, and a good example of this is imagine how you feel when you're watching a movie and someone is crying, or you're crying in a movie. That's not happening right now. That happened whenever they made the movie, but you find yourself crying with it, or you find yourself in scary movies, all of a sudden your heart beats faster and you jump. Nothing is happening in the room where you're at. Cognitively, you're an intelligent human being. You know that there's not someone coming at you with a knife, and yet you jump. It's because we're mirroring the feelings of the person on the screen, so much so that we have a physical reaction. If you are around babies at all, about the age of 3 months, the moment you smile at a baby, they smile back. If you frown, they will frown. If you're in a terrible mood, they'll be in a terrible mood. They are mirroring what happens. As we age, we try to shut that down. We try to desensitize ourselves to it. Our children try to shut it down. We need to bring our students back to that natural feeling of emotional empathy that allows us to be figuratively in the shoes of another. And there's ways that we can do it and build that skill like you would a muscle. And Susie's going to walk you through a teaching strategy that helps students to build that emotional empathy.
Okay, and this is a tough one right here. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is let's go back to inquiry. And I'm going to ask you to put some things in the chat, respond. It is fine to put in I see, I think, or I wonder, whatever comes to your mind, to your heart first. And if we can just get you thinking about it so that we can be prepared to do this activity. It is heavy.
Mm-hmm.
We'll watch that and we'll get some thoughts going, but I'm gonna keep moving along right now. The second thing you would do then for this exercise is to share, we will share the guidelines of empathy building. So we're going to use a series of empathy directed questions so that students can practice building that, because remember, it's not natural. We're going to use a memory, an imagined scenario, and a person to build this empathy. Let's start with memory. Let's look and feel. When is a time in your life when you have felt the way you feel now looking at this image? Tina, engage us with a memory.
So I'm just trying to take a deep breath here. And I want to caution some of you that my story is layered with a lot of pain. And if your memory is similar to mine, my prayer is that you will get the healing that you need and that you deserve. But I think about, I'm going to speak figuratively. I've never had literally a noose tied around my neck, but figuratively, I have. I have a principal who decided to be brave enough to make me equity coach and lead equity work. And because of the disruptive nature of my work, I felt like some of my colleagues were choking me to death, putting a noose around my neck, slowly murdering my spirit, taking the life out of me. The more I fought to challenge the status quo, the more they fought to maintain it. And even though they didn't physically kill me, I felt like I was dying. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was choking. And I just wanted somebody to get angry enough, somebody to be mad enough, somebody to hate enough what they saw happening to me to come and just take the noose from around my neck. But nobody ever came. Nobody ever did. And so even though, like I said, I didn't literally die, they did take a piece of bone flesh, and some of my spirit was murdered in the process.
Tina, thank you for sharing that. I know that that's not easy. Let's keep going here. Imagine being there. What would you feel? And Tina, I'm going to come right back to you for that. What would you feel?
Witnessing something like that, being there, I tried to imagine my age. Would I be a little girl? Would that be my father, my uncle, my brother? If I tried to imagine my feelings, I would probably feel scared and empty, afraid. I would probably feel hatred for those doing it. Be filled with a bunch of just questions.
Absolutely. Tina, let's take this third step in this empathy building activity. Who do you know who may have felt the feelings like this person?
Black students. Black students. I could name 100 of them, but one comes to my mind in particular, who probably felt helpless, like he had no one. Probably wondered, why aren't people showing him empathy? Why is no one coming to rescue him? No one coming to advocate for him? We see what's happening to him. Like, why do people think that that's okay? Why isn't anyone doing anything? And I won't say his name to protect his privacy, but yes, there is a particular young student, young Black boy who comes to mind.
Tina, my heart's pounding. We practiced this. Whew, nothing like doing it for real. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have a story I was going to add on. What I'd like to do now, I think I'd like to save it for that session when we can talk about it. It's a little lengthy, so.
Thanks, Susie.
We'll come back to that.
Everyone listening can hear the depth of pain in Tina's voice. As teachers, we know our students are bringing to us vast, diverse trauma. And as we started the first RISE webinar series, we talked about the trauma that we collectively have been through. Collectively, teachers and students have all been through this trauma of significant loss and of uncertainty. When you use this second strategy, you're really building empathy in a significant way. I've used this strategy for about 20 or 30 years with my own students. When you have them look at a memory, then look at imagining being there, then looking at who is someone that you know might have felt like that, what you do, is you actually bridge the gap between trauma and healing. In order to get to healing, you have to allow students the space, the support, and the comfort of knowing that they can share their story with you and then change that narrative. All of us who surrounded Tina as she shared that story with us gave her that space and that emotional support so that she very bravely could step in and share it with you. That's the power of doing this work with your students, of building that emotional empathy muscle of theirs so that they can go from trauma that is in their world, in their homes, in their neighborhoods, to healing in your classroom. And that's the only thing that will change our country. We have to change it one student at a time, and we have to be able to do it by holding space for them and having the courage as teachers, just as Tina did, to be able to ask students their memories, ask them to imagine, and ask them who is. That whole process, when it follows doing the primary source analysis tool and doing a deep dive of inquiry of these sources that can open up our hearts, can really change our schools and our systems so that students like Tina students can start to talk to each other, because it leads them to the third and most powerful type of empathy. It's the empathy that our country needs now. It's the empathy Michelle Obama spoke about last evening. It's compassionate empathy. Compassionate empathy is the one that says, I'm going to help. Compassionate empathy is what Principal Rodriguez said he felt. It's what Camille felt. It's the one that said, oh, wow, I feel what you're feeling. I know what this might be like. I've imagined myself there, and I am going to step in because I'm going to say, no, this cannot happen. So when in your life have you ever felt something so deeply that you were called to action? For me, this is the antithesis of civic action. So when have you felt something so strongly that you found yourself in a position where you actually acted? The very first time in my life was when I was younger and seeing what happened in Vietnam. And that to me compelled me at a young age, I think I was 12 or 13, to actually do something in protest to that war. But in the chat, if you can put when you were called to action, and I'll share with you a brief story of the first time as an adult I was called to action as a professional. I was in my first month as assistant principal of a Catholic school, and there was a racial incident where students put a terrible racial slur in the bathroom, and the students came to me to tell me it was there. We immediately wanted to find out who did it. We took away the racial slur, and at the time I said to the principal, we have to do something. She happened to be away from the building and wasn't coming back for a couple days. The very next day, the kids came to me, actually 3 days later, the kids came to me and said, we're gonna stage a walkout. 1,600 girls were gonna walk out, and we've called the media. And they wanted me to assure them that they wouldn't get in trouble. They of course, were good Catholic school girls, and they didn't want to get detentions. And so they said, Ms. Keel, can you just make sure that we don't get in trouble? We want to go to our ring dance. It's on Friday, all of the things that kids would do. And the principal was there, and I said to the principal, okay, the kids are going to walk out. And she said, okay, you got to stop them. I said, no, I'm trying to figure out how they can not get in trouble. And she said, no, you got to stop them. And it was in that moment, I could see the kids' faces in my mind's eye, and I could see her determination. And I said, you know what? I'm walking out with them. And I had this real fear, because I also needed a paycheck, that I was going to get fired. But I knew it was more important to me that I do something and that I protest racism with the kids. And so we walked out together. When in your life have you felt that? Has that happened to you? And Susie's got a little a story in the chat. Susie, do you want to share that real quick?
Yeah, through the Our American Voice program, I asked our fearless leader, Sheila, if I could make a difference, an impactful difference for kids. And we took some folks from Englewood, a classroom from Englewood, and took them to the Deep South, and we went to Birmingham and Selma and Memphis. I felt like in today's day and age, they needed to learn from the past how young people had done things right and made mistakes so that they could take those skills, those understandings, and now I'm realizing empathy, okay, didn't know that then, and be able to come back and apply it. And that was 4 or 5 years ago. I would love to get back with those kids and see if they're making a difference right now in the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I will be doing that.
Thank you so much. So if we look at, there's another strategy I want to share with you quickly that really can take this to action in your classroom. And it's actually epitomized in the Our American Voice program, but it's a Civic Action Genius Hour. And using the teaching methodology of Genius Hour and combining it with civic action, we can bridge that gap between being activists for racial equity and also inspiring genius in our teachers. And so let me give you a brief synopsis of it, and then I'll have Tina share her experience of using this methodology with her students. But what you would do is use the primary source analysis tool to examine a primary source and guide students toward an understanding of what civic action is. And then what you would do with students is help them to use empathy to look at solutions to what they see as the underlying feeling of the people depicted in the image or the story that you're looking through, and they create the solutions currently to the image that they see from the primary source. What exists? How can I change it? How am I called to civic action? And you can make this Genius Hour be an interdisciplinary kind of connected lesson with your students that extends over a semester. But what you could do starting right away this fall when you go back to remote teaching is use Civic Action Genius Hour to transform your classroom, your remote classroom, and our country. Have students become the voice of civic action. So Tina, do you want to quickly share just your experience with Genius Hour?
That's in a nutshell. I just decided that I needed to find a way to get students off the couch. Like, how can I get them to log on with me and get them off the couch? And Dr. Kill and I were talking, and so I wanted to give them an education that could prepare them and compel them to towards civic action. And so that's what we did. We did Genius Hour. So there are some resources for you that we're providing for those who want to take a stab at it. But it's really about helping students to discover the genius in them and then using that genius to solve the problems in our world. And I actually did it with my students, and my product ended up being a 4-day Racial Equity Institute that I created, and we did it this summer at my school, which is good.
So we were patting ourselves on the back for our last 2 webinars because we ended exactly on time, but we're not going to do that with this one. We're going to be a little bit over. So if you need to log off, we totally understand, but hang with us and you'll get to some really important nuggets at the end. There's a 4th strategy, which I call HERE, and it's for daily empathy and equity. And HERE stands for halt, stop. So when a kid is involved in a situation in your class or when you are talking, this little 4-letter strategy helps them to slow down and slip into empathy. If they stop what they're doing and stop the internal dialogue. So you have to, kids are having, all of us have an internal dialogue that says, I'm not good enough, or I'm angry, or I need to move on. We've got this tape running in our head. They have to stop that, focus on the speaker, engage with what the speaker is speaking about. And so you ask your kids to, really tune in and to give good eye contact. I used to, when I would teach kids empathy skills, I would say, please look in my eyes. Please continue to look in my eyes. If you can look in my eyes, you'll stay with me. And then anticipate. Have the kids learn to anticipate what a speaker might be saying, because then they'll keep them guessing, but they stay engaged. And then have kids actually rephrase what they've heard. And that's a typical counseling tool of what I hear you saying is. You have kids do that with whomever they might be feeling something with, if it's anger or aggression, using that simple HERE strategy. And actually it's great for your personal life as well. If you halt, if you engage, if you anticipate and you replay, you'll be far more engaged with whoever it is that you're talking to. And we want to share with you this incredible developmental relationship framework, and Tina's going to share with you those highlights.
Thank you, Donna. So it's something that I learned from my work with Network for College Success, for those who are familiar with them, out of the University of Chicago. And the Search Institute identified 5 elements that they express in 20 very specific actions that make our relationships powerful. And the first one is express care. I won't read this to you because I know you can see it, but one of the things I just want to just point out one, and that is being someone I can trust is so important, because you can't learn from someone you don't trust. You just can't. And so students need to be in trusting relationships in order to be able to learn from you. The next one is challenge growth. Like, push me to keep going. But you know how sometimes we can have these high expectations for our students and we just want them here and we just want to go warp speed to try to get them there. But we need to make sure that we provide the supports. It's okay to challenge them, but we want to provide supports for them as well. And for this one, I want to focus on that last one, reflect on failure. Something I learned from Zaretta Hammond in her research, where she said that we should create norms for errors in our classroom. When students make mistakes, they shouldn't see their mistakes as inadequacies, right? They should see their mistakes as information that can help them to improve. And so if we just did that, if you just focus on just going back in the fall and doing that, changing how students look at their mistakes, then I think that will be able to push students to grow. The next one is providing support. I want to talk about empower here for a second, because I don't want us to be confused about empower, because Black and Latino children of color, already have power in them. They need us as teachers to give them the freedom to use it. So how are you building their confidence to take charge of their lives? And when they do, don't punish them, because that's what we're teaching them to do. It's in the Common Core State Standards. You know, speak up, make arguments. So that's what we're talking about there. Sharing power, something that Network for College Success pushes for those of you who have been in community with them, is sharing power with students. So in the chat, just quickly think about one way you're going to go back when school starts in a couple of weeks. If you're in Chicago Public Schools, share power with your students. One thing that I did, and Dr. Keel challenged me to do this, I co-wrote a unit with my students. We wrote a unit together. It was one of the most transformative things I have ever done as a teacher, because they got to be a part of decisions about their own lives and what they were learning and how they were learning. Best unit I ever taught in my career. And the last one is expand possibilities. As adults, you know how you have friends that are saying, girl, you need to go there because you can network. Let me introduce you to this person. Why aren't we doing that for our children? None of us on this webinar are arrogant enough to believe students can only learn in our classrooms. Who are we introducing them to that they can learn from? Who are we introducing them that can help them to grow? So let's give them the life and the opportunities that we seek out for ourselves.
So we have a little video that we're going to end with, but before, I know that some of you need to get off, so I'll have our closing comments first. Again, I really want to thank Sheila Smith and the Bear Education Foundation and Citizen U, along with the Library of Congress Teaching with Primary Sources program, for sponsoring this webinar series, and of course DePaul University. But I deeply want to thank Susie Evans, Tina Curry, and Felicia Shaviri for your wisdom and your bravery in doing this 3 series on racial equity. We'd love to keep the dialogue going, and so what we would like to do is have a series of monthly meetings called Rise Continues. We'll have an open Zoom session where you can share ideas. They will be half-hour long. We will give you 10 minutes, and I promise 10 minutes, 10 minutes of a strategy that around racial equity, so something, a takeaway, and then we'll dialogue for 20 minutes so that we as educators can be the change that we want to see in the world. So we hope that you'll join us. If you have logged into this webinar, we have your email and we will post that. We will also post it on the Citizen U website for you to join. We'd ask you to come and join us and bring a friend. So bring a colleague. Let's keep the discussion on racial equity going. Let's not let the beginning of the school year, the day in, day out, that take us away, stop this conversation. Because if we stop the conversation, we stop the civic action. And we need to go from conversation to action to change. And our children deserve it, and the future deserve it. So with that, speaking of children, we're going to end with the voices of students, as long as I can do this very quickly. so that I promise it's short, but it's incredibly empowering. So listen to what the kids say.
Listen to students of color. And I think that this is a big thing, even just in our society, is that like, as people of color and as youth, we know what we need. Like, we don't need teachers to tell us what we need. So I think that the most important thing is to like give us a seat at the table, give us an opportunity to tell you like, this is what we need, this is what we want to improve our schools.
If you as a school know that, you have a problem in terms of race and treating minorities in your school and not being as equal and fair to them, then you need to look internally and see what you can fix, and you need to address it thoroughly and not quickly.
Sometimes students aren't really heard. Some of their ideas are shut down, and I feel like that's not helpful, because at the end of the day, it's like the students going to the school, going through these things, and they're going home, living their own personal lives, and it reflects in their academic life sometimes too. So like listening to the students and actually like implementing that would be helpful. I think like that could start with just like a simple like opening up to like a discussion.
You as a principal or counselor should know what's wrong in your school. So looking in internally and reflecting and saying, all right, these are some complaints we've been having, or this is what I see that's wrong in the school. Take your time and try and fix it. And really take your time and try and fix it, because you owe it to those students that are at your school every single day.
Just by being honest and like being real with the students and not being willing to like shy away from like the stuff, like, because we all watch the news, we all are all on social media, so we see everything that's going on. So if they're more honest and more willing to talk about it and like even willing to like answer questions or even talk about like the stuff on the news, like I feel like that would do justice in the schools.
There needs to be like reformed school policies around microaggressions. I think there are things that students say to other students that, while, as my administration said, are not discrimination because they didn't say it to you, are definitely things that are wrong. So I think just reforming those policies, but also making sure that there's some restorative justice in there. So suspending a kid for 3 days because they said the N-word, I don't know how much that will achieve. Or talking to them in the office or putting them in safe. But if you actually took the time to like teach that student like why you can't say the N-word and make them more cognizant of that, I think that there are a lot of students that if they really understood why those words aren't appropriate, they wouldn't use them anymore. To
make Black students feel safe and supported, I think that some teachers might have to get out of their comfort zone and talk to a student like, all right, this is what it is. And how can I, as a teacher, understand where you're coming from?
We need more people in the counseling aspect. And that's not even just like mental health support, but also help with college applications and job applications and career things. That's so important. And I think that's one thing that people aren't getting, and they're like, getting in trouble, and then they don't have these skills and they don't know how to do it. They're not seeing people who look like them that have succeeded.
Once you get to high school, there are a lot of other systematic things that have played out that might cause students to be at different levels. I think that there needs to be a lot more done to make sure that students get put in the right rigor of classes, and also to make sure that like general classes are not just remedial.
The stuff that really matter is how to live, and also for how to be beneficial to yourself, especially as a colored person. Like what I mean by that is we need to learn how to, we don't get to learn to pay taxes. We don't get to learn how to do these type of, learn how to pay bills. We need to learn life skills.
History needs to be taught on the ethnic background of the school. Like if the school is majority Black and Hispanic, like more Black history and Hispanic history should be taught. Because that also has to do with like a confidence level too. Because if we read in history and we don't see Blacks doing like things that we see whites doing, then like we won't have the courage to go out there and try it for ourselves.
So thank you all so very much for attending today. And if you would like the recording of the session, we'll have that on citizenu.org on that website. Thank you so much for contributing in the chat. And we hope you'll come to the open sessions that we'll have on RISE so that we can continue this good work together. Thanks, everyone.